So, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining the first episode ever of the GMI Rocket live stream podcast, Immigration Tech and Marketing Show. Today I'm really excited to talk to you because I think that immigration technology is a huge industry. I think immigration, while many people think is niche, is massive and moves people all over the world. And the technology behind it sort of supports that movement. And I think that we need a voice for our industry. We need to inspire folks to be the next, builders and tinkerers in the immigration space, and hopefully learn from people like you about what you've done and how you've got to where you are, and what we can learn going forward. So for folks who are joining, thank you. This is really, really exciting. Basically, what I'm going to do here is we're going to talk for about 20 to 25 minutes. We're going to dive into Jeremy's story, both as a person and then as a founder of an immigration tech company, and sort of get learnings from there. And then afterwards, we're going to open it up to some questions. So, leave questions as we go, and, I'll run by them once sort of we're towards the end of the conversation here. So we're going to talk for about 20 to 30 minutes. And then the second 30 minutes, we're going to go through folks' questions. I'm going to have questions. We're going to do a whole bunch of discussion there. So yeah, feel free to leave your comments. I might not be addressing them in the very, very beginning, but I'm seeing them, I promise you. So with that being said, Jeremy, thank you again for joining. So, you and I have known each other for a little bit. We connected through the immigration technology space. You have been an awesome friend and mentor and idea bouncer offer. There's so many different things. But I'm curious, you have such an interesting background. You're a lawyer, but you're not an immigration lawyer. So, if we go back a little bit, can you just tell me, where are you from? Kind of, where did you go to school? How did you end up as a lawyer first and foremost?
Yeah, so I'm actually Canadian. I was born and raised in Toronto. And then I came to the US for college. I went to Emory down in Atlanta. And when I graduated the finance degree. I went to work in investment banking at Morgan Stanley in New York. After a couple years, I felt pretty burned out from that and went to law school, which felt like a natural transition for me. In law school, I became interested in tech. I started learning to code during time, but continued on track. When I graduated, I went to work in corporate law at Proskauer, just kind of like BigLaw in New York. Mm-hmm. So that's what brought me into law.
So you were coding while in law school. What kind of made you think that was? Law school is not a place where you take up new hobbies, especially something like coding. Why did you do that?
My brother had started a tech company in 2010 called Buzz Home. That's based in Toronto. It's basically like real estate tech. And I'm close with him, so we used to discuss it a lot. He wasn't technical, and kind of wished that he was. And as old as I was going to get before learning to code, after which point it would just become prohibitively difficult. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't spending an enormous amount of time. I was learning really basic HTML, CSS, just basically how to build web pages, which technically isn't actually programming. But learning enough that I would be able to build the front end of a website, should I at some point decide to go off and build a tech company, which was kind of in the back of my mind. But we were in the midst of the financial crisis at that point, and I was pretty into the idea of getting a safe job after graduating. So I wasn't yet there. But it was a combination of a hedge and just something that I thought was really cool and felt passionate about, and enjoyed. And I'm really happy I did it because it came through for me in the end.
Absolutely. So would you, and I'm curious, would you kind of go home after Civ Pro and just finish up that work and then open up your HTML, book or something like that? I mean, when did you find time?
To be honest, I didn't work that hard in law school. I remember, this is totally off topic, but I remember I had a professor who told me this is the trick with law school. You rather than studying everything that could be asked you on the exam, you figure out like the 5 questions that could be asked, the things the professors really harped on, and you write the answers to those questions before the final, so that when you go into it, you have 5 answers, 2 of those questions were actually asked, and you can basically just regurgitate those answers into the final. I hope there are no law students watching, but that was a really effective strategy for me and freed up all kinds of time to learn how to code.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And I'm curious, so your brother started a tech company. Is he kind of an entrepreneurial guy? I mean, it feels like you had in the back of your mind the thought that you might one day either just need the skill or actually start something of your own. Would you consider yourself an entrepreneurial person? I mean, before Docketwise, before where you are today, or do you think it was just more practical, and then you had some of that entrepreneurial spirit come from your brother?
My brother's definitely an entrepreneurial guy. This is his second company. His first one was called Nutrition in Motion. It was like a meal delivery app. And then he sold that and started Buzz Home, which was his first internet company. I have a higher, or I should say a lower risk tolerance than him. So I didn't have the courage to graduate from college and just start my own company. I mean, he was doing it before it was cool, right? Like now doing a startup is an acceptable career path. Like if you tell your parents after college you're going to do a startup, that's like almost at this point the equivalent of going to work at a law firm or going to work in finance. When he started Buzz Home, I don't think startup was even really a word. He used to tell people he was founding a company. So he's definitely more entrepreneurial than me. For me, the breakthrough, it was actually when I married my US citizen wife while working at a law firm at Proskauer. I managed to convince her that for our honeymoon, we should spend the first half of it trekking through the Peruvian Amazon. And she got on board with this. And we flew down there after our wedding and set out on this adventure. We had like a guide and a tracker. And we were going off on this, I think it was gonna be like a 5-day trip. But there were floods and we lost our trail and we got completely lost by the second day. So I won't go into the whole story. There's actually like a New York Times article about our idiotic misadventure in the Amazon.
Yeah.
So
you have to. You can't lead with that and then ignore the New York Times story about your misadventure. Can you give us?
You should Google it. But basically, we lost the trail. We got completely lost. We didn't have a compass. We didn't have any food. Our guides had packed like a carton of 12 eggs that broke within a couple hours of leaving our cabin. So I had a backpack that to this day, it could be in my head, but I feel like I can still smell the rotten eggs in this backpack. So we were totally out of food. We didn't have a compass. We couldn't see the sun above the canopy in the jungle. So we couldn't use that to navigate home. We were relying on the hunter who had spent a lot of time like in the backcountry there to hunt for us, which he did pretty proficiently. He hunted a peccary, which is like an Amazonian boar, and fish and bird. That's what we were living on. But by like the third day out there, I'll admit that there was doubt about whether we were actually going to make it. And in that state, kind of meditating on the decisions that had led me to that point, I realized that if we made it back, I was not going to continue working at my law firm. I was going to quit my job and start a company. I didn't know what the company was going to be, but I was going to go for it, which isn't necessarily advice that I would give anybody to like quit their job and start a company without knowing what the company is going to be. But that was the choice that I made.
And, you know, I love that because there's so many people who go through, I feel like, experiences that sort of change their risk profile. You know, if you didn't go through this experience and your vacation went as planned, you might have gone back and maybe you would have had the idea to start a company in the back of your head, but the push might not have been there. Right. And this is one of those things that just fundamentally changes something about you. It might be small in the moment, although this seems like it could have been pretty big because, you know, what a wild experience. But, you know, there's so many different types of moments that change people and, you know, put them on that path. I mean, that's awesome. That's such an interesting story. And like, of course, really glad you got back here safe and sound with your wife and, you know, the person that helped you. So did you go in after that and just put in you came in, you still had weeds in your hair and stuff, and you just gave your 2 weeks notice? Like, I'm curious, right? Because this is one of the things that people have asked me many questions about. I'm sure many people have asked you about. Okay, you had this crazy experience. Does everyone have to get lost in the Amazon to decide to quit their jobs and pursue building a company, specifically in an industry? First of all, not knowing maybe what that company is, but perhaps if they do know, it's still scary. What was that transition like? I mean, did you come back and you were going off of that energy of being lost, or did it take you some time? You had to think through it. Kind of, can you walk me through that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually there are a lot of movements. It's actually kind of a natural point of transition. My wife's a doctor and she had gotten accepted into a residency program in Philly. Mm-hmm. So the idea was that we were going to move from New York to Philadelphia and I was going to look for a job there. Or maybe continue to commute from Philly into Proskauer, which I knew other people doing as well. So that made it easier. But it was stressful. Like, I mean, I'll get there later, but even a year into running the company, until I was like taking a salary, it's an extraordinarily stressful experience. I heard someone say, or I read somewhere that that you should become an entrepreneur if you can't do anything else. Like not from a merit standpoint, because being an entrepreneur is actually quite difficult. But if you just can't stand to do anything else, like to report to someone or like, and I'm not putting down that way of life at all. And I'm not even sure that advice is that good, but it just sticks in my mind because I couldn't do anything else. Like, both in my experience working in investment banking and in my experience working at a law firm, I did not enjoy what I was doing. I like creating, I like being the one making decisions. I like excitement. Like, I like coming to work every day and not knowing what's going to happen. And the roller coaster that's inherent to the life cycle of a startup. I really love that stuff. So I can't imagine at this point ever doing anything else. And although I'm not sure it's actually true at this point that you should only do a startup if you can't imagine yourself doing anything else, I do think that it's a good thought experiment when you're considering it. Like, there's a risk in doing a startup. It's most likely to fail. You're giving up a lot. Think to yourself, if you don't do it, do you see a path to happiness, like career happiness? Like, do you see a path to being fulfilled, working for someone else or working for a big company? And if you do, then that's something to consider. It's not dispositive necessarily. A startup may still be in your future and it may be the right decision depending on your idea. And there's a lot else that should go into that decision, like having an idea that you validate before you take that leap of faith, which I didn't do, and was a mistake that nevertheless ultimately worked out for me. But yeah, I do think that that's a useful consideration.
So, you left the job, right? You started working. People know you as a CEO of Docketwise. Many people don't realize that before Docketwise was another company called BorderWise.
Right.
And I think that, is so, first of all, it's something that was the sort of birth of what it is today. And it also, as far as I understand, it kind of came out of more of a personal experience, right? Because you're not an immigration lawyer. You were not building a platform that helped, you from your personal experience. So what kind of led you to create BorderWise first? How did you meet James, your co-founder? I'd love to hear about that. And then essentially, how did you pivot that into what Docketwise is today?
Yeah, so we actually, it wasn't that BorderWise was first. We built both companies at the same time.
Okay.
And what happened is I got back from that honeymoon trip and realized that without my job, my TN visa was no longer valid. So I had to get a green card fast. So I searched around for an immigration lawyer in Philly, found one who really impressed me, like encyclopedic knowledge of immigration law, really smart guy, but his operations were like insane, were just so terrible. And I remember he gave me like 20 pieces of paper with questions written on them and told me to go home and give 10 to my wife and keep 10 for myself, and to just scribble basically like the contents of my life in pen or pencil onto these sheets of paper. Address history, employment history, assets, financial information, biographical information. And then I brought them back to him and realized that what he was going to do was like take that information and type it into upwards of 70 pages of USCIS government forms. And that just seemed like the craziest process I had seen. And a process that technology, like if technology was built to solve any problem, it was that, right? Like to streamline the kind of thoughtless monkey work that lends itself to collaboration and to tech. So I felt like this is the idea. Like I just decided that I was going to start a company. Here was a massive pain point that had yet to be validated, but seemed to me like something that needed to be solved. But I knew that if I was going to build this, like I could write the code, at least for the front end, but I needed a domain expert for the immigration law because I didn't know anything about immigration law. So I went to my immigration lawyer and pitched this idea to him, and he loved it so much so that he ultimately left his practice and joined me as my co-founder, and that's James Pittman, the chief product architect of Docketwise.
Love it.
But so what happened is I was really excited about solving my problem, which is that it was expensive and painful for me to apply for my green card application. James was really excited about solving his problem, which was the amount of time and effort required to prepare his clients' petitions, like just hours every day of him copying information from those paper questionnaires he would give out into the immigration forms. So we were at a bit of an impasse. And what we decided was to create a product that was agnostic enough that we could market it. We could use it to test out both business models and see where the product market fit was and pivot in that direction. Or at that time, I thought that we could even manage both of them. Although I can say now from experience that unless you're Elon Musk, it's like extremely difficult to run two companies at the same time. You really have to give everything you've got to one of them. So that was the idea. So we built an MVP, like a minimally viable product, which is startup speak for a product that is sophisticated enough that it can be useful and you can potentially sell it to people, but simple enough that you aren't wasting too much time building features in something that could fail in case you have to scrap it. So the question was, what is this MVP going to be? And we decided to focus just on family-based permanent resident applications, green card petitions, because this was a big pain point for immigrants and it was a big pain point for immigration lawyers. So the product that we envisioned was going to be this really streamlined, friendly, approachable, aesthetic, nice to look at questionnaire that just asked clients questions about their lives. It was shareable. You could open it up in your browser and just type in information. Super easy for the clients. But under that facade of simplicity was going to be this really complex algorithm that was taking the client's answers to our questions and figuring out A, what to ask next, B, which forms were required for this particular petition, and C, how exactly to fill out those forms. So that in the end, while the client just feels like they're answering questions from the immigration lawyer standpoint, at the end of it, they can just click print and they have their entire package of 70 pages of immigration forms that they can review and submit. So we spent about 6 months building that. It was a wild experience. James and I hanging out in his office every day. We wanted to build it out in a really robust way. And here, I don't know if any like aspiring startup entrepreneurs are watching, but I have a bit of a gripe with the MVP concept, or at least how it's interpreted by a lot of startups, which is that to a lot of people, it means that you can build a bad product and get it out there to validate it. But when you're trying to validate a bad product, it's a variable that is difficult to control for. You don't know if there's actually product market fit, and you're not finding it because the product's bad or if there just isn't product market fit. So we set out to build, yes, a very feature-light product, but we wanted that feature-light product to be really badass. So we wanted to capture every permutation that that a family-based green card application could possibly take, and we spent 6 months, like the nerdy lawyers we are, just brainstorming. I would throw out use cases at James. They would be like, yeah, in that case, I guess we would have to have this combination of forms. We have to fill out one of the forms in that way. And then we would just code it. Like we would throw all that stuff into the code so that after 6 months, we had this really amazing piece of tech that didn't do much, but what it did do, it did really well. Yeah. And we launched it. So we launched the consumer-facing product Borderwise. For that, we used, so we launched the consumer-facing product Borderwise to immigrants that were applying for their green cards, and we launched what was then called Borderwise Pro and was ultimately rebranded as Docketwise, which was our SaaS subscription tech for immigration lawyers to streamline their, at that point, just green card petitions for their clients. Borderwise, we launched through the media. So we actually found it was pretty easy. It's kind of like a sexy story. You have these two technologists, or like a technologist and immigration lawyer, building the like TurboTax of immigration law. So we were pretty successful getting the Washington Post, Telemundo, NBC, all these outlets to write about us. And that brought in a lot of users to that product. What we found, which was frustrating, was James and I made a decision from like an ethical standpoint that we only wanted Borderwise to be used by people with the most straightforward kind of happy path case. Even though the software is sophisticated to handle more difficult cases, we didn't want immigrants to rely on the technology in an ad hoc way without assistance from an immigration lawyer, given the chance that their petition would be refused. So what we built into the consumer-facing side of it is, as soon as the tech detected that this was not the most simple, straightforward kind of case, it would indicate that they're not eligible and ask them to hire an immigration lawyer.
Got it.
That meant that we were giving away like 80% of the leads that came down the funnel, we were sending away from our product, which is a crazy thing for a fledgling startup to do. And I can talk about this for a while. It's kind of a different topic. It's not our founding story, but for what it's worth, there are a lot of cool modern tech companies that are doing this kind of thing, like what Borderwise did. There's like Boundless and Simple Citizen, and they're really good, like in a really strong way, but they have to give away so much business. I feel really strongly that that business model shouldn't be viewed as a competitor to immigration lawyers. Like, immigration lawyers shouldn't feel like immigration tech companies are eating their lunch. They should just be stealing their ideas and integrating the tech into their own websites. Because for an immigration law firm, when those leads come down the funnel and you realize, oh, this is actually a complicated fact pattern, we are going to want to bring immigration, like our immigration lawyers, into this. They can retain the business. They don't just have to send it away. But anyway, we found pretty quickly that that business model was problematic. Conversely, there was Docketwise, which was a totally different launch. No one wanted to talk about it. Like, Washington Post was returning the calls. Media didn't care. We went about it in this like very boring, straightforward way. We just called 10 immigration lawyers that James knew in Philadelphia and scheduled a week of meetings. We like lugged our computers into their offices and demoed the software for them. The first one that we demoed, the first immigration lawyer, thought it was cool. He was polite about it, but he said it just didn't have the features that he needed, which was pretty crushing for us, because that was like, that he was the first one we spoke to. It was like 100% failure rate. But the next 9 that we spoke with subscribed, like in the meeting, put their credit cards down, wanted to use it. And what was amazing to me is it didn't require any education. Like, they didn't need us to explain to them the pain they were experiencing. And they didn't need us to explain to them why they needed the solution that we were hawking to them. They just got it. They were like, oh yeah, filling out forms is really time consuming. I would prefer to be spending my time on more sophisticated, thinking through sophisticated legal issues than populating these forms. I can see how collaborating with my clients is going to work. I'd love to subscribe. And that was pretty amazing validation for us. So we used that validation. We stopped building the product out and did a quick round of financing, not big, like $300,000 in financing, which just gave us enough cash to bring on some additional engineers, do some marketing. And that kind of set us on the trajectory that we've been on for the past 5 years. As soon as we had those 9 users, features just started rolling in, feature requests and complaints and things that we have to change. So I never really had to think of where I want the product to go. We have our users making those suggestions for us. And I would really strongly encourage any entrepreneur to take that approach of iterating based on feedback and listening to users. And it's been a pretty gilded experience for the past 5 years. We've been growing at over 100% across most of our metrics every year for 5 years straight. Well over 1,000 firms, thousands of immigration lawyers and paralegals, and we're really excited to see where the technology goes next.
That's so cool, and it's so inspiring to hear, your first demo was a no, and the next 9 were a yes. But how many people stop after that first no because they've spent so much time working? They're so emotionally invested in this, just as they are financially. And, it's just devastating. It could potentially be devastating because you're excited, but then the person ultimately says no. I'm curious. I want to know, we've got some questions coming in, and, I want to get to some folks' questions. This question in particular is really key to where we are right now in the story. It's coming from Abhi Chawla from LinkedIn. And, he asked, how's legal and business education and your law firm experience helped you in your startup and day-to-day, like contractual transactions and things like that? I mean, basically, how has your legal and business acumen sort of helped you as the founder?
I don't think it has. My wife disagrees when I lament the amount of time I spent in education. But I feel like I wish I never took computer science. I wish I never studied computer science because I spend most of my time these days coding. I think the legal stuff I don't rely on at all, except when there's a legal issue, and even then I hire lawyers to help me with it. If I had been an immigration lawyer, it would have helped tremendously, but fortunately I have James for that. So if I was a corporate lawyer, if this was a corporate law tech company, then it would have helped tremendously. But because this is so far from what I studied, it doesn't help. It might give me a little, maybe it gave me some more confidence when I was trying to raise capital. People took me a little more seriously. But as soon as you have users and a product that's making money, you don't need that anymore. I suspect that if I had done this, maybe I couldn't have convinced James to quit his practice and join me if I didn't have some degrees. So in some very soft ways, as far as bolstering who I am, because the crazy thing about starting a startup is when you first try to build it, you get stuck in this vicious cycle, which is that all you have is your idea and who you are. All you have is your ability to articulate your idea and convince people that you're the person to implement it. And that is frequently not enough to get anyone to join you. And if you can't get people to join you, then you continue to be all your company is, right? In order to get out of the vicious cycle of not having anything to show for your company, you need to have something to show for your company. And most startups, or I would guess that a lot of startups don't get out of that. They don't get financing because they can't convince anyone that their idea is valid, that they're the person to implement it. To the extent that you have a couple of degrees under your name, or you have some experience in big companies, it can be a little bit easier. I suspect it's easier for Stanford grads to raise capital in Silicon Valley than high school dropouts. But in terms of hard skills, I kind of wish that I had, foregone college and learned to code in a MOOC at home, and then started my first company 15 years ago. But sometimes it takes time to find your path.
Yeah, I agree. I can definitely resonate with that from my perspective also. I mean, obviously for me, being an immigration lawyer was helpful to start an immigration tech company. But, other than that, you realize that it's not really necessary. You need the idea, you need the network, and you need the kind of grit and passion to get it done. For folks listening, start asking questions, whether it's about the immigration industry, where we are today, specifics, broad questions about starting a company, et cetera. We do have a couple of questions, but, I thought that was a perfect question to ask given where we are. I'm curious now where, you and I, you're in Philly, I'm in New York. Maybe we would have done this virtually anyway, but we sort of have to now because we are, in the middle of a quarantine, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Where there's also a lot happening in immigration, right? There's a lot happening on the news. There's a lot happening. It's an election year. There's just a lot happening all at the same time. Are you feeling that at all? Like, are your clients feeling it? You know, what do you think is the current state of the immigration industry from your perspective? And I don't know, what are your thoughts about moving forward from where you sit? Not even just for you, but in general.
Yeah, well, I remember there was that Monday morning, I think it was March 17th, when the stock market crashed, and it felt like public awareness of COVID had really hit home. I realized at that point that the operative word for moving through this environment was empathy, which can sound cheesy, but it's good both from a humanistic standpoint and also from a business standpoint. So the first thing we did that morning is blast out to all of our users: if you are struggling with cash flow issues, we'll defer your payments for 2 months. And then we ended up deferring payments beyond that. And even this morning, I received an email from a firm that said they love the software, but they're struggling with their firm. They don't have the cash flow. Do they have to cancel, or can they continue using it and pay later? And we said, of course, you can pay later. So I guess I'm seeing two primary effects. One, firms are struggling. Like a lot of I've received probably 30, 40 emails from law firms saying they're struggling to meet cash flow. Can we defer their payments? What can we do for them? So that's one element. The other element that I'm more optimistic about is a massive wave of tech adoption by law firms that have been resistant to move away from those 20 pieces of paper that James handed me 5 years ago. These are the firms that over the past 5 years, we haven't been able to convert into Docketwise subscribers because they were resistant to the idea of collaborating with their clients with an online questionnaire. They felt it was imperative to sit in an office with their client and work through the questionnaire with them. Again, especially if you've been doing this for 20 years and that's how you do it, it's difficult to wrap your mind out around a completely different process. And I've spoken with a lot of attorneys who feel that the clients aren't up to the task. They don't have computers, they don't have internet, they don't have an email address. These are all creative solutions that we've had to work around by allowing our users to share questionnaires by text message, making our questionnaires completely mobile responsive so they can work on mobile devices. But all of these firms or many of these firms that have been resistant to the idea of adopting technology in their firm, we're seeing COVID forcing them to make that change. And if something positive can come out of this situation, it's that. It's forcing firms to become more efficient and more technological, and to adopt technology to streamline their processes. We saw this during the financial crisis, I remember, where companies just learned to become more efficient. In that case, there was a dark side to it, because for them, becoming more efficient often meant laying people off and making do with fewer people. With tech adoption, hopefully it's about streamlining processes so there's less friction and less pain for their employees, their paralegals, their staff, and most importantly, their clients. So yeah, what we're seeing, because this is such a difficult situation for everyone, I feel reluctant to speak about the positives that we've experienced, but to the extent that it's useful to you to know or interesting, because I know that we have data that other people don't have, we've signed more firms, like way more firms in the past 3 months than we were previously. We've also lost some firms, because they've shifted their practices or they've stopped practicing altogether, which is always it's a really sad event for us when I receive an email from a firm that loves the tech and that I have a relationship with, maybe has been using us for 4 years and is shutting down their firm. But by and large, what we're seeing is firms are sticking in there and adopting technology to make their practices work. And that's nice to see.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. I've seen that on my end as well of, companies who are dealing with folks working from home and, dealing with H-1B compliance, sort of finally taking that step and reaching out and saying, okay, look, we've been doing this with 20 pieces of paper or the equivalent of that. And sort of what can we do together to digitize? And it's been interesting. It's really, there's just a lot of information about legal tech in general, accelerated adoption of technology, whether on the corporate side, whether on the individual side. I think these are some net benefits in an otherwise pretty ugly time. So, if I can, we've got one or two more questions. And again, if folks are listening and if you have questions, questions for Jeremy, please throw them in the comments. We'll definitely be getting to them. One last question that I wanted to ask you is, what do you see in the future for our industry? Whether for Docketwise specifically or for immigration technology more generally, given where we are now, obviously travel will open back up, immigration policies, however awful seeming potentially right now, ebb and flow. But what do you think is the sort of bigger picture moving forward, if you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, I don't think we're going back. I don't think this tide toward technology is going to regress when the pressure of COVID alleviates. I think that people are experiencing the efficiencies of technology, and that is going to continue. And you can see that if you look at, when you look at the NASDAQ versus the Dow and the S&P, I think last week and week before, it was the greatest it's been in years, if not in history. I think tech is having its day. Probably a lot of people, we all thought tech was already having its day, but now we realize it's really having its day, which as a technologist excites me. There are obviously some concerns about that as well, but I think net, it's a positive trajectory that we're moving in. What I'm really excited about and what I think is critical in our industry is greater collaboration between tech applications. So like what you'll find in other industries is there is often a platform, Apple, for instance, with iPhones. The iPhone is a platform, and then it makes it really easy for all the apps on your iPhone to work together and to reach end users. In the more generic legal space, you have Clio, which is maybe a more on-point analogy, where Clio bills itself as the operating system for law firms, which I think is a really great brand and a really great goal. Where you have Clio, your firm is built on Clio, but you also get to use all the niche products that the Clio engineers don't have the time or the priorities to build, and those products integrate with Clio. So you have that cooperation between apps. So that's facilitated through something called an API, which is like a tunnel in cyberspace that allows different applications to work together and to share data back and forth. And we, I think a month or two ago, made our API public so that applications could integrate with Docketwise, and all of our firms could benefit from a myriad other really cool immigration-focused apps without having to constantly re-enter the data that they have in Docketwise into their other applications. So that's the direction I see the future moving in, where immigration law firms can be working in Docketwise, then they want to translate some of the documents that their clients have uploaded via the Docketwise portal. So they click a button and it shoots over to a translation app. The document is translated, it shoots back to Docketwise, and without going anywhere, suddenly their document is in English. That's something I'm really excited about, that future of a integrated, collaborative immigration tech community.
Love it. We've got some questions coming in. So, maybe this one is a little bit more on the, we'll see how this goes, but we've got Howard Stolovitsky saying, do you have a platform for Canadian immigration? And this is going to a Canadian national right here. So Jeremy, be careful what you say.
No, I would love to expand Docketwise into Canada. This isn't the first request for that we've received. There is a market there. It requires some market analysis as to the number of immigration lawyers there are in Canada. I certainly wouldn't foreclose that option, but currently there is not.
So Chase Hertel from Chicago asks, what do you think is the key in making consumers and clients comfortable in working with their attorney via an online experience? Obviously, we're all seeing that folks are doing, telemedicine is on the rise. I mean, telehealth, your yoga teacher is now 100% remote. Everybody's remote. Lawyers, however, are becoming remote, but have never traditionally been fully and for remote first. I think it's happening more and more now. What do you think is the key to making folks comfortable with that?
Yeah, great question. The truth is, this is the biggest pushback that we received from law firms when we first launched. My clients won't do it. My clients can't do it. They're, as I said, they don't have email addresses. They don't have internet. They don't have a device. We pushed through that, and I've actually stopped receiving those questions in the past year or two. I feel that we have convinced the market that it is not actually a problem. I suspect that lawyers are typically less enthusiastic about technology than their clients, and that by and large, they're the bottleneck. The issue with clients, I think often, and I should note, I'm not in these law firms, I'm not in these dialogues, so there's a lot that I'm not privy to, but I do see the end result, which is that when we started out, we had a lot of law firms that weren't using the invitation workflow. They were just entering the information directly into Docketwise, and that is less and less the case. So we're seeing in our metadata that a significantly increasing percentage of our lawyers are leveraging the collaborative functionality that we've built into the questionnaires and sharing the questionnaires with their clients. And I think that the obstacles what prevents clients from adopting the technology in general isn't a psychological barrier, it's tech friction that we can solve. So examples are when we first started Docketwise, it's common for web applications to use emails as unique identifiers because in most industries, everyone has their own email. In the immigration community, it's actually quite common for many people to share emails. So that was a very real barrier. Immigration lawyers couldn't invite their clients to complete questionnaires because their clients were all sharing the same email. So we solved that by enabling them to send the questionnaires via text message. Another major barrier was language. Difficult for an individual that doesn't speak English, that only speaks Spanish, for instance, to fill out an English questionnaire. We solved that by converting everything into Spanish, so everything is translatable. Another one was mobile responsiveness. A lot of clients are using their smartphones to fill out these questionnaires. So we put a lot of time and effort into making sure that the mobile experience in our questionnaires is really clean and easy to navigate. So I have the conviction that that these are all problems that we can solve for our users by making the tech more friendly and approachable. and the trajectory of history is increasing tech adoption. So if I'm wrong right now, I will be right at some point in the future. So
I hope you are right. Yeah, no, that's I love that. You kind of you meet the clients where they are, and you build like you said before, you kind of the direction of your platform and your product is driven basically by the demands and the needs of your clients and their clients. All right, we have a couple of more questions. I do see a couple of kind of more technical, maybe specific questions for Docketwise. I obviously encourage folks to reach out to Jeremy. Jeremy, I'm assuming you'd be open to folks reaching out to you if you have specific questions about Docketwise. I didn't want to really dive into the sort of technical aspects of the platform here today, and really more focus on. Yeah, go ahead.
Feel free to reach out to me directly. My email is jeremy@docketwise.com, and I would love to have your questions.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so let's have a couple more questions here before we kind of finish up. From Andrew Wilson, your thoughts on why USCIS is behind DOL with online filings in tech? Any thoughts on when USCIS will allow for more online filings? I kind of concur with this. I do, just from my experience, have also seen DOL be pretty forward thinking. They have a whole open API. As far as I've seen section, they're pretty good with their technology. What are your thoughts on that from what you can see, obviously, from your vantage point? None of us are in the government, so we can't fully say why, but any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know any more than anyone else. I have seen that they are at least making some progress. We're seeing more forms eligible for online filing. And we'll see where that goes. But, government adoption of technology tends to be slow. I think the IRS, don't hold me to this, I could be wrong. I believe that the IRS in some way partnered with TurboTax. I think there's some integration there. I think that was a brilliant move. If anyone in government is listening, I would love for USCIS to partner with a cool, modern tech company that can help streamline applications. We would love to do that. But when governments are left to their own devices, they can move slowly. So it doesn't surprise me. What surprises me is that DOL has moved so quickly.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, thanks. So, we're getting close to the hour. Just if you want to leave us with any, last thoughts, and then we'll call it a day for our first episode. And thank you again, Jeremy. This has been awesome and so fun learning about your story. Any last kind of thoughts you'd want to share with folks about where Docketwise is going, or just anything else that's sort of on your mind right now?
No, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Thanks everyone for listening. If you want to check us out, we're docketwise.com. My email is jeremy@docketwise.com. Our team is team@docketwise.com. And I'm looking forward to speaking with any of you.
Cool. So let me just, I'll take you off the screen here for just a second. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Just wanted to say to everybody, thank you so much for joining. I hope this was awesome. We're going to be doing this every Friday with other, immigration founders, folks in the tech space, folks building cool things, whether new or established. Reach out to me, where to find me on LinkedIn, on Facebook. If you have any thoughts or comments or questions, keep leaving them below. And thank you so much.